It was the winter of 2012 when my friend Rich disappeared in the northern Diablo National Forest, in central Washington state. Details are murky, but what we do know is that Rich had wandered into the notorious wilderness and never returned. Diablo is a vast and wild place, a place where nature seems to have no regard for human life. Searchers scoured the area for weeks, but no trace of him, not even footprints or bits of clothing, was found. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. A year later, Rich's father, Uncle Bob, some of you may remember him from the Demon Forest Hunter story, reached out to me. He asked me to join him in one last search for his son. It wasn't so much a question as it was a plea. "We gotta go find Rich," he'd said, eyes hollow with grief. But I couldn't do it. My heart was still weighed down by fear from that first search, fear of the dark unknown lurking between the trees. I politely declined, though the guilt gnawed at me for weeks. Instead, I offered my help in other ways. Uncle Bob kept searching, and I reached out to anyone who might be able to assist: forest rangers, park officers, anyone with experience finding the lost in the vast wilderness. The more I learned, the darker things got. One of the officers I spoke to was a veteran in search and rescue, a man who had seen things in those woods that couldn't easily be explained. He told me that, on average, 2,300 people go missing in America's forests every year. Most of those disappearances were eventually explained: suicides, accidents, murders, but there were always a handful, maybe 100 or so each year, that defied logic or scientific explanation. These people simply vanished without a trace. Finally, I tried to gather as much information as I could for Uncle Bob, pointing out places where others had gone missing in similar circumstances, hoping he would find something that would bring him peace. But he never did. I had always thought the forest was just that, a forest. Trees, wildlife, maybe the occasional hidden ravine or a misstep that could spell disaster. But after talking to that officer, it became clear that something else was at play. Something we couldn't understand. The missing left no clues, no trails, no bodies to recover. It was as if they had been plucked from existence by unseen hands. There are two stories that stand out to me from that time, tales that still keep me awake some nights. I'll tell you those now. Maybe they'll make more sense to you than they do to me. But remember, once you step into those woods, the rules of the world you know no longer apply. Among them was a man from Isan, Thailand. He'd been living in the US for years, working as a chef, trying to build a better life in southern Oregon. He was a quiet man, the kind who preferred the company of the forest over the chaos of the city. So when his friends, the 6 workers from the restaurant, invited him to go pick mushrooms in the Rogue River forest, he jumped at the chance. It was the winter of 2013, just after the devastating forest fires in southern Oregon had finally subsided. Rogue River was still recovering, but nature had a strange way of bouncing back, and that year the mushrooms sprouted in abundance. For the small Thai and Lao community working at a Chinese restaurant nearby, it was the perfect time to take a break from the kitchen and head out into the woods for a mushroom-picking adventure. They arrived early that morning, the air crisp with the first touch of winter. As they stepped into the forest, they found it teeming with mushrooms. The fires had cleared the underbrush, and now it seemed like the earth was offering up a bounty in return. Excited, they split into 3 groups to cover more ground. The first group was 3 people, the second had 2, and the Thai man, eager to cover as much territory as possible, chose to go alone. They agreed to meet again at noon for lunch at the designated spot. Time passed quickly as they searched the forest floor. The basket was quickly filled with mushrooms. By noon, the first 2 groups returned, chatting and laughing about their finds. But the Thai man had not shown up. At first, they did not think much of it. He was probably deep in the forest, still gathering mushrooms. They did not want to waste precious time. They figured he might not be hungry, so they ate and waited for him to show up. But by about 3 p.m., when everyone was supposed to be heading home, he was gone. It was then that anxiety began to set in. Something was wrong. They knew the forests could be dangerous, and it didn't take long for people to get lost, especially after the fire had transformed the landscape. They rushed back to the park entrance and reported his disappearance to the rangers. Almost immediately, a search team was mobilized. Helicopters equipped with infrared and thermal cameras swept the skies, while a ground crew of 40 to 60 people spread out in a grid, combing the area. A team of 6 trained sniffer dogs, eager to pick up the scent, was brought in as well. For 2 days, the search continued, day and night. The helicopters found nothing, no signs of heat, no movement beneath the trees. On the ground, the team worked tirelessly, their efforts yielding no results. But the strangest part came from the dogs. The K9 team told me later that something about this case was different, eerie, even. Normally, when these dogs pick up a scent, they're full of energy, eager to do their job. But not this time. The 6 dogs sniffed around the spot where the man had last been seen, then one by one, they stopped. It was as if they had lost all interest, their excitement vanishing as they stood still, refusing to track any further. The handlers said it was the strangest thing, they'd never seen the dogs behave like that before. It was like they'd hit an invisible wall, a point where the trail just ended. In the end, no trace of the man was ever found. No footprints, no belongings, no heat signatures. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The officers had no explanation. They concluded it as just another case of a missing person, but there was something about this disappearance that didn't sit right. It was as if the forest had taken him, leaving no trace behind. The search for the missing Thai man had stretched into its second grueling day. Helicopters had circled endlessly, and search teams with their sniffer dogs had scoured the forest floor. But on that third day, nature turned against them. A massive storm rolled in, bringing heavy rain and whipping winds that made it impossible to continue. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing, and the decision was made to call off the search. Officially, it was now classified as a missing person case. But that didn't sit well with everyone. The local police, having seen their fair share of strange disappearances, turned their attention toward the man's friends, the very group he'd ventured into the Rogue River forest with. Was it possible that this wasn't just a simple case of getting lost? After all, thousands of murders occur across the country each year. Could this be a murder cover-up? The detectives began following the man's colleagues, quietly observing, hoping to catch someone acting suspiciously. They wanted to know if anyone was hiding something, maybe even moving a body. It wasn't far-fetched to think that someone could try to stage an accident, then hide the evidence, but the officers weren't convinced. Moving a body through the dense forest would have been difficult, nearly impossible, without leaving obvious traces behind, broken branches, deep footprints, anything. Moving a body is no simple task, one officer had told me later. Imagine carrying a 70-kilogram bag of cement through those woods. You'd see signs of it all over, branches snapped, the ground disturbed. But there wasn't a thing. These detectives weren't amateurs. Some had military backgrounds, with years of experience tracking people through wilderness much harsher than Rogue River. And yet, after 2 days of searching, they found nothing. No signs of a struggle, no tracks, no body. It was as if the man had simply vanished. Then, as if the forest hadn't already played enough tricks, the rain came down in sheets for 2 or 3 days, washing away any hope of fresh clues. But once the storm had passed, a local hunter, out to track game, stumbled upon something strange. He was walking along one of the forest paths when he spotted a flash of bright blue lying on the ground. It was a jacket. And as he drew closer, he realized it wasn't just a jacket, it was the lifeless body of the Thai man. What shocked everyone was that his body had been found just 50 meters away from where the group had originally split up. 50 meters. They had been searching all around that area, and yet somehow, no one had found him before. It didn't make sense. Logically, it was impossible. How could a man disappear for days, only for his body to turn up so close to where they'd last seen him. It was as if he had walked into the forest, vanished, and then somehow returned. But of course, that was impossible, or was it? The police were baffled. Something about the case didn't feel right. They sent the body for an autopsy, still suspecting foul play. Maybe there had been violence among the friends after all, and the man's body had been hidden until the rain made it impossible to keep it concealed any longer. But when the autopsy results came back, the mystery only deepened. The cause of death? Hypothermia. He had frozen to death. No signs of assault, no toxic substances in his system, nothing that indicated foul play. The only way this man could have been killed was if someone had forced him to sit still in the cold and freeze to death. But that seemed impossible. There were no sedatives in his system, no drugs in his stomach. It was as if he had simply sat down in the woods and let the cold take him, completely on his own. And that was that. The police closed the case, unable to prove anything else. The death was officially ruled an accident, a tragic misjudgment of nature's danger. The story made the local news for a while, and people around town talked about it in hushed tones. But for those who knew the forest, who knew just how strange it could be, there was a lingering sense that something else had happened out there. Something they couldn't explain. For those planning to go hiking, let this be a lesson that nature is unpredictable. And sometimes, the forest. It hides a mystery.